Welcome to Inside Access. And what I really want to share with everybody is since the podcast came out on Monday with Greg Gigantino at Hofstra, I've had a few requests via email, and that gave me this idea to bring in Lynn Groll. How are you doing, Lynn?
I'm doing good. Good to see you again, Coach. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. And, and just as people know, Lynn and I did the very first episode of our podcast on the Manny Matsakis Show. Now, this is an Inside Access feature where we do a variety of different things. I mean, last week I did one with, I was home and my mother was teaching me how to make a Greek egg lemon soup, which was crazy. And it was fun. So we get a video of that. I put the recipe up. And more Inside Access is more about just getting an inside perspective on coaching football and the life of a football coach, and I'm a career football coach. So a lesson learned, and this one, we're going to harken back to those days when I had been at Kansas State University, and at the time I was coaching receivers with Coach Snyder, Bill Snyder, and Del Miller was the offensive coordinator at the time. We had a great coaching staff there, and it was just something that I was in the midst of in coaching, opportunity to coach in the Big Eight back then. And where I want to go from this, and Lynn is here to just dig into this a little bit and give you some insight out there, is how does one get their first coordinator job, and what are some ways to go about it? So go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, and your interview with Greg Gigantino was awesome. I listened to that last night, and tell you what, that was some good stuff. I sent it to a few of my buddies, and they loved it too. Just I love the history of the game and just kind of the history of coaching, and that's what you and Greg kind of got into, and just gets the blood boiling a little bit.
It does, especially this time. Everyone's wondering if they're going to play football or when are you going to play, and you get a guy, a legendary defensive coordinator like Greg. On a podcast that we shot a year before. On Friday, you'll see some of the video of it that we post, and we're actually in my brother's we're in his kitchen actually in New Jersey, and Greg came up and we did it and just say, hey, I wasn't sure at that point I'd ever do a podcast, but it was something like, let's take a look. And it ended up being a lot of fun for me. And it's also given me an opportunity to revisit with some great football coaches. And that's what the podcast does for me. I can learn from so many guys.
Yeah. And you go to K-State. What was kind of your initial reaction of going to a Division I program that at that time had the worst record in Division I history, and Bill took over in '89?
Yeah. It was interesting because for me, I had been coaching at Barberton High School near Akron, and I had an opportunity to be a graduate assistant, went there, and Stan Parrish had been the head coach at the time. So I went through a season, and I learned a lot that season as well. I mean, I'm a graduate assistant working on a master's degree, and I wanted to go because my brother George had been signed by them to be a punter at Kansas State. So it was almost like some package deal. I was teaching like science classes at Barberton, was assistant football coach. So I said, well, let's go get a master's degree and see what we can do. So that was how I got to K-State initially. And then after a very difficult season for Coach Parrish, he got let go about mid-season. And we brought in Bill Snyder. And I was fortunate that myself and Dana Dimmel from the previous staff were allowed to stay. And then next thing you know, he elevates Dana, he elevates me. And I think the loyalty to Coach Snyder certainly helped. We were all learning so much, but just that opportunity to learn from, at that point I didn't know I was going to be, Coach Snyder's going to be a Hall of Fame coach. I just knew he was demanding, and he had some great assistant coaches on the staff that made me realize that I have a lot to learn. And so I did that for a few years.
Did you know Coach Snyder a little bit coming into that? He was at Iowa as
Nothing.
OC before that with Hayden Fry, obviously.
I didn't know him from Adam, nothing, which is crazy because we get into my first offensive coordinator. I didn't know that guy either. So, but it's just, I think when he came in the office, the year before I had been as a GA, was elevated to coaching special teams. He had a one-on-one meeting with me. I handed him a stack. Here's my special team scouting reports, and then he got back to me. It wasn't a couple days. He says, "Hey, you want to stay as a graduate assistant?" I go, "Well, yeah, that was an honor, to have that opportunity." So you don't know, even though you don't know somebody, it's like when they come into a situation. Guys that are in head coaches, they're listening, they're watching for cues. It's like, I know, like when I got here to Defiance College, that I paid attention to the guys that were on the previous staff. I noticed what was going on. They didn't know. I was more than willing to keep every single one of them, but they didn't do anything like that to share with me, like, oh, I want to be here, So I think so. That's basically how that worked out.
And it's kind of intriguing to me, kind of all the offenses you've been around. You know Ben Griffin, who started the Hambone at Georgia Southern.
Yeah.
Take me through that and the Hambone. What is describe that offense a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's interesting. You think about this. It's like Georgia Southern, tremendous history, national championships, and so forth at the 1AA level. What we today call FCS, and what they started out with Irk Russell, who I found out recently is not in the College Football Hall of Fame, but because he doesn't have enough years as a head coach, which bizarre. I don't get that. But anyway, he hired a guy by the name of Ben Griffith, and Ben was from Georgia as well. He was coaching high school ball in Georgia, and hired him at Georgia Southern, and told him to run the offense. Now, in that process, Ben was into the option at the time, and the USFL was coming out, and Mouse Davis and those guys were at the Houston Gamblers, and he went over and studied from him. So what he did is he merged the run and shoot from Mouse Davis and the triple option that he liked so much, and he started to do some things with this guy named Tracy Ham. Tracy Ham, if you look him up, was a legendary player in the Canadian League. Also, he's in the Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame, I'm almost certain. And you look at what they would do because of this guy named Tracy Ham. They called it the Hambone, all right? And that's what it was. It was like something very similar to a guy that was Ben's graduate assistant. It was Paul Johnson, all right, who, fantastic football coach. And that's where he got it and then went on to move on. So, Ben was a mentor of mine and an assistant football coach at Kansas State, which that's a whole other story of how I got into the run and shoot by learning from a guy like Ben Griff. But that's who Ben is, and I could do a feature just on him.
Yeah, and Jerry Glanville obviously was kind of at that time was the NFL and maybe the most famous kind of that run and shoot type
he had
guy
been with the Falcons.
Yeah, that people knew about.
Yeah, I mean, he had the background of the Oilers, Falcons, all the stuff. Those are the run and shoot teams of the day. Detroit Lions. Mouse Davis is the one that made it. Basically, brought the run and shoot to the National Football League. And Mouse is a mentor, a good friend, and all that. That in some ways, during my time at Hofstra, I had the good fortune of getting to know him then, but I didn't know him before I got the job, which is crazy.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. The Hofstra deal, and you wanted to go to Holy Cross, and at the time they were kind of the small division college football power. They were 60-5, and over a 5-year period or something like that. It was just crazy. Mark Duffner, head coach, just good stuff. And that's where you wanted to go. Take us through that story, Coach, of wanting to go to Holy Cross.
What happened was I'm sitting there at K-State, and even though I loved it at Kansas State, I was learning the run and shoot because I was working on my doctorate, and the title was The History and Evolution of the Run and Shoot Offense in American Football. I was obsessed with the run and shoot. I was obsessed from being at Barberton and learning a little bit about it there. My head coach there, Don Alt, had given me a book on it, and I said, "Oh, this is cool." And then it was just always on my mind. It was one of the things you just can't sleep at night. So while at K-State, it's like I've got to get into the run and shoot. And, you're in the Big 8 conference at the time, but for me, it was more about learning and growing and improving. It wasn't about where I was. And I, down the hall at K-State, John Latina, our offensive line coach, is down there. And I go, "Hey, John, there's a job, I think it was a receiver's job that opened up at Holy Cross." And they were a run and shoot team that I think they had, I don't know if that was prior to Gordy Lockbaum, was a Heisman finalist there, and I said, "I got to get in on this."
Yeah.
He goes, "Oh, well, I know Clyde Christensen. Right. We're buddies. We were, they go way back." And, John, fantastic offensive line coach, had been at Temple with Bruce Arians, had done some good things, and he calls him, and Clyde, I can remember the conversation. Clyde goes to John, he goes, "Look," he goes, I really want to get Manny in here. Just from what I know that he knows and how he could help us, he would be great, but he's got this guy coming in to interview, and I'm not going to mention anything till afterwards to see how the interview goes. Well, the guy ends up being Rob Spence. Mm-hmm. And Rob, I mean, I've always admired Rob. Rob is a very good football coach. His at the time at Hofstra was a fantastic run and shoot guy. Now he's gone through different paths and was run and shoot and then wasn't run and shoot. Actually, he was down the road here, I believe, at Toledo as the offensive coordinator at one time.
You're right? Yeah.
Yeah, he was at Toledo and was at Clemson. I mean, great football coach. And so, I'm like, but I didn't know who he was. I had never heard of Hofstra at the time. So I find out through John Latina that Clyde says, "Well, we're going to hire this guy from Hofstra." And I look over at Ben Griffith, and we're down the hall. I go, "What's a Hofstra? What was it? I never had heard of it." And it wasn't really anything wrong with Hofstra. I just didn't know what it was. So we did a little research, and I was trying to get the job that Rob had left. It was the offensive coordinator job at Hofstra, and they had been Division III, and they were moving to 1AA. They were moving up to where Holy Cross was playing that level, but Rob had left the coordinator job to be a receivers coach at the time. So that was the opportunity that suddenly appeared. I was thinking I wanted to be a receiver coach at Holy Cross, and then an opportunity to potentially interview for the offensive coordinator job at Hofstra showed up.
Yeah, and now Clyde Christensen is coaching Tom Brady.
Yeah,
in Tampa Bay. How about that?
Yeah, Clyde's he's a great coach. I mean, it's funny. A year after I get the job at Hofstra, I was speaking at a clinic in Atlanta, and it's where I came down, and Ben Griffith had put it on, and it's the first time I met Hal Mummy, Mike Leach. They were, I believe, at Valdosta at the time, and they came to hear me speak at that venue. And Clyde was there. He was one of the speakers. We were a couple. Joe Lee Dunn was there to talk about defense. It was a heck of a clinic. A lot of coaches from Georgia came to Ben's event, and that was after we had really done a good job at Hofstra. But yeah, it's strange how this goes back and forth, the ebb and flow of this. And you come in thinking, I want to just learn more about the run and shoot, so I'll go learn under Clyde. Yeah. That's what they were doing, at Holy Cross, and then bam, that shuts down, and I'm like, okay, I still want to learn about the run and shoot. I thought I knew a lot because I'd learned it from Ben, and I had learned it from Tiger Ellison when I was working on my dissertation, which that's a whole other deal where it's my path on learning the run and shoot. And he invented the run and shoot, and he happened to be from Middletown, Ohio High School as well. So that's where I was sitting at Kansas State after I found out that, hey, you can't be the receiver coach at Holy Cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You go from the little apple to the big apple.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy because I didn't know I could get an interview. You know, I mean, I didn't know Joe Gardy. I didn't know anything about them. I mean, the year before they had been, I think they must have won 12 games or something in the Division III playoffs, and their quarterback, I think he tested positive for substance or something like that, and they lost to Lycoming in the playoffs, or they really could have made a deep run. That year, Allegheny, I believe, won the national title, and Hofstra was tremendous, but they had to go without their quarterback, and they lost in the playoffs. So, you know, they were good, but I didn't really follow it. I didn't really know anything about this deal. So, you know, so we started doing some research. Ben knew Mouse Davis because when he was creating his offense, he went to Houston to visit with him. He calls Mouse, and you know, Ben in his eloquent Southern, you know, Tennessee kind of way, you know, the accent and all that. I'm in his office, and he calls Mouse up, and hey, Mouse, you know, and he just, I can't do the accent, but I'll tell you, it was tremendous. I could sense the bond that he and Mouse had, and so he goes, hey, look, I got Manny here. I need you to help him get an interview at Hofstra with Joe Gardy. And I didn't know Mouse. I just knew a guy that knew him. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and Mouse goes, put him on the phone. So first time I ever talked to Mouse Davis, to me, legend in the game, right? And we just hit it off. You know, it's like 45 minutes later. We're just talking on the phone. Just, you know, this guy, I know that guy. The Tiger Ellison stories, those things came up, which was really neat. And he goes, yeah, I'll call Joe for you. So he calls Joe. And then he calls back. And tells me, give Joe Gardy a call and see what you can do. All right. So I pick up the phone, call Coach Gardy up, the head coach, and I basically take the next 20 minutes to try to convince him to interview me because I believe he had somebody else he was going to hire at the time. And he was in a hurry to hire. And I just took a chance. I said, listen. I said, Coach, you don't know me, but I will pay my way out there. I'm not asking for a dime. And I will interview for you or however you want to do this thing. And I'll be there in a day. I'll be there in 24, 48 hours. Give me a day to give me a plane ticket from Manhattan, Kansas to New York. And I'll do the interview. And if you would just give me that, I don't need a reimbursement, just the opportunity to get in front of you and show you how I can help.
Yeah.
And that was it. And he goes, well, you know, Manny, why not? I got nothing to lose. and our guys here, he had a great assistant coaches. They love to learn football. And I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, what's this interview going to be like? You know, so I find out that the ticket ended up back in those days. You're talking about 1990-ish. That ticket cost me about $1,500
wow.
because I had to get the next day, and you had to go to a travel agent. It wasn't like you could get online or anything like that. So I said, you know what? I had some retirement that I'd put away from teaching high school. I said, I'm going to pull this out, take a shot. So sometimes you have to take that risk.
Yeah.
And I got the trip to Hofstra, and I think I flew into Newark LaGuardia. That's where I flew into LaGuardia, and a GA, I believe Greg Boudet is his name, he lives in Staten Island today. He's a firefighter now, and was a tremendous football player at Hofstra before offensive lineman. Picks me up, takes me to the campus, and it was interesting. I had brought so many materials. Just, I think back right now, it's like, wow. I had an outline of materials. I had all these things ready to go to share with Coach Gardy what my plan was, my vision for running the offense was. So it started that way.
How prepared did you think you were going into that interview? Were you nervous at all? Do you recall? I mean, that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I I wasn't nervous at all. It was more, I had done it so many times. What I used to do, and even then I used to get like a camera on a tripod, and I would clinic to myself every aspect of football that I knew. And I just had it in my office. I had it on. Boom, I put it up. Let's say John Latino would come in my office, or some coach. I'd turn on, say, hey, show me something. And I would videotape them teaching stuff. And then I would try to emulate these master teachers in there. And I was so used to teaching in front of that camera that, I was good, so that I was good with that. But the preparation of it was crazy. Lynn, I got on the plane with 2 suitcases for a 24-hour trip.
Wow.
Yeah, one suitcase, I'd say 1.5 of the suitcase had nothing but VHS tapes in it. And I had every play, every scheme, every installation you could imagine. There was well over 100 VHS tapes, all labeled, of all my study of how I did it. Okay. So I brought those on and then the rest of it was just enough clothes to put a suit and tie on and go there. So I get to Hofstra and it's late at night, and they put me up in a dorm, and it's like, it must have been like a Thursday night, maybe. I believe it was a Thursday night, because Thursday night was like party time on the dorm, on the floors. So these parties are going on outside. I'm a little under the weather. So I'm sleeping in a dorm room. Kids are partying outside. And the next morning, Coach Gardy's going to come get me at 8 o'clock. I had not met him yet. I had just been dropped off at the dorm. So you would think, interesting. And then I had this, basically a 10-page outline, not just note. This was just, there were no notes, just outline. This is what I'm going to cover. I had created an 8-hour presentation on how I was going to teach the run and shoot offense and implement it at Hofstra University. That's what I woke up ready to do that particular Friday morning.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable, because I walk in and Coach Gardy comes pick me up, takes me to breakfast. And, Joe Gardy was legendary.
He coached the New York sack exchange with the Jets as their defensive
DC.
coordinator.
Yeah. He was a head coach in the World League.
Yeah.
Joe Gardy, the internet wasn't much back in those days, but this guy was just his experience with the National Football League, with the officiating. He was working in New York City. He was living out in Suffolk County, and it was just fascinating. Here I am, and I'm meeting a guy that now I look back and think, geez, he was so good at working with people and gave you the ability and gave you, it wasn't the autonomy so much, because I know Greg Gigantino, he got to run the defense. I got to run the offense. Rob Spence got to run the offense. Other guys are working for him. It was more, if you needed something, he was there to make sure you had what you needed to get the job done. Right? So that's how the whole interview process goes. But I'm there interviewing Lynn, and we're in the way they had it set up. Coach Gardy had his little office. This is the old field house in the end zone. And then there was one room that had all the assistant coaches in it. And that's it. So I'm in there. And so I set everything up. I got my suitcase with the film. I got a TV on a monitor back then, sitting on a cart with a VHS player. And I start to clinic. And I start to teach this. And it's not like just Joe. It's the whole staff is in there. They're all in there. Bobby McIntyre's in there. I'm starting to think, because he just retired from Stony Brook as a defensive coordinator. There was a linebacker coach. And we had all these assistant coaches in there just taking notes. I'm like, this is great. I'm thinking I got 8 hours planned. I got 10 pages. I got everything. I'm going through the beginning as if they know nothing, teaching them this thing. And I'm about an hour and a half into it, and Joe just stops the interview. He said, come on in here. I'm like, oh, man. I hope I did okay. I don't know. I had so much more. I just talked about one pass scheme or something like that, right? And so we go in Joe's office. At this point, it's just prior to noon maybe. And he goes, "Hey, the job's yours." I go, "Excuse me?" "I'll take it." He goes, "You don't even know what it pays." I said, "I don't care what it pays, coach." He goes, "Well, that's not good negotiation on your part." I'm thinking like, oh my God, I've never called a play before. I've learned the run and shoot from a guy that was a very, very close friend who's since passed away. And I had studied it through film from afar, because at that time the Houston Cougars were fantastic and I had all their film. It was hard to get. Ben Griffith had been at TCU and had a shootout game against Houston, and I had all the film of the Houston Cougars. So it was like, okay, I had all that. I had everything you could imagine you could have at that point in time. It's crazy. And then here I am. He's offering me the job, and you don't do this stuff for the money. I've never taken a job for the money,
right.
And it was cool. I mean, he offered me like $45,000. Back then, I was making $40,000 at Kansas State, so it was a little bonus. He gave me what did he give us? Jigs and I both had, I think it was Ford Escorts or something. We had a car. He gave us a car, which I was afraid to drive for about all spring. I was afraid to drive it because if you've ever been in Long Island after leaving Manhattan, Kansas, you don't want to get on the parkways there.
Yeah.
And in fact, the GAs used to just drive me wherever I was going. And then they also, part of the deal was great. They gave me a house on campus at very, very low rent.
Awesome, yeah.
So he made it so we could get the job done. And so we moved from the Little Apple to the Big Apple.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you still have the VHS tapes and the paperwork and some of that stuff from back then? Have you kept any of that? No?
I didn't. It was just like, it was how I first installed it, and then I started knowing it more and more. And then while I was at Hofstra, Mouse Davis was the head coach of the New York, New Jersey Knights in the World League of American Football. And we didn't have spring ball, so I used to be able to go over and help him out at practice, whatever he needed. So I started to get more and more insight into what was going on. I could study the film that Rob Spence had the year before, learn a little bit from there. And so I was ready to see what that first season could become for me, teaching it.
Yeah. Was it common practice back then for an assistant coach somewhere to call up a head coach and kind of ask for a job? Is that something or was that unique?
Well, there wasn't email so much.
Right. There wasn't the technology of today.
Yeah. So you had to call people, which is so different than now.
Yeah.
I get so many emails every job. It's crazy. Emails, I'll have a GA position open up here at Defiance College, and well over 100 candidates are popping up for that thing, from everywhere. So it's just, back then you had to know somebody who knew somebody. And that was it. And it still is, I believe
still
it's
the same
that way.
Yeah.
It is. And the closer the connection to the gatekeeper, the head coach that makes the hire, the better chance you've got. And that's what this was. So I took an opportunity and I was able to get to New York and Hempstead, Long Island, and get a career start as a coordinator.
Yeah. And there was a quote I heard from the show that you did with Greg the other day. Don't tell me how rough the seas are, just bring in the ship.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool. Who came up with that one?
All I know is it was Joe. It was a Joe Gardy.
It was a Joe. Okay.
Yeah, that was it. And it was like it has come back, and our players. I know if you say the first part of that statement, they'll know the second part.
Yeah.
Joe used to have some things that were like very, very interesting because it's like his experience in the National Football League was like, you just get the job done. Don't tell me that you're grinding. Don't tell me how hard you work. That means nothing.
Yeah.
Because I've been at, him. He's been at the pinnacle of this deal. And he understood that I want people that are smart, hard workers, very, very genuine in their approach to getting the job done. So whatever the head coach needs, you get it done. And at that point, my job was to put in a new offense, which was a little different than the one before, but it was, my name was going to be on it. And Joe said, hey, let's go get this thing done. What do you need from my end to help you?
Yeah.
And he was always there by all 3 years I was there.
I want to know about Coach Gardy and maybe some of his discussions about the New York Sack Exchange, Marty Lyons, Mark Gastineau, Joe Klecko, Abdul Salam.
Right.
Did he talk about those guys?
Yeah, he did. And I was there. It was his second year as the head coach there. I got a lot of the stuff from Greg Gigantino. And then he would, he'd talk about, I love the staff meetings. I mean, we would go through things and Joe would just sit back and he'd pontificate, as I would say, and he would give us the insight of this is how it is, because he had a direct line to the top in the profession. Coach Snyder was one way. Coach Gardy was totally different.
Hands off a little bit and just kind of let you go.
Yeah, I mean, he was, a pro in that respect because he had been a pro coach for so long. So that gave me the ability and autonomy to learn without the constraints of being put into this systematic box. This is the only way you can do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he would talk about those guys. And I think, and Marty Lyons used to, all our games at Hofstra were on Metro Sports New York. So huge. We had huge viewing audience there, right? And Marty Lyons, he was, he did the color commentary.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, we'd go on the road. A few years later, we played Montana.
That's awesome.
And there's Marty, and it was awesome to have this group there. And I think back what Hofstra was, you had a guy like Jim Sheehan, who was our sports information director, fantastic, a pro, got it, could promote what was going on Long Island because it was something big in the region. But as we know now, since Hofstra doesn't play football anymore, I believe that there was so much going on there that in this day and age, an SID like that could have blown it up. It's just it was difficult to do it because think about this: you're on Metro Sports New York. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people watching every single game you play.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. We didn't have that at Kansas State.
Right.
And that, so being with Joe was really great for me from that perspective. But it still came down to we each had to get our job done.
Yeah. Marty Lyons, this is kind of a famous line from clips of the old NFL age. You remember him hitting Jim Kelly late in a game against the Bills, and the referee throws a flag. Instead of calling a personal foul, he said, for giving him the business. Remember that line, Coach?
Yes, I do.
And that was Marty Lyons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The younger generation may not know about it.
But they can look it up. It's all there.
But it's a great clip. It's one of the most famous NFL referee, probably the most famous NFL referee clip. Yeah. Marty, yeah.
Love it. Love it. It's crazy.
Yeah. Getting that program really going, what was the keys for you guys at Hofstra, Coach?
I'm fortunate because I walked into a program that had won a bunch of games. Coach Gardy knew what he was. Those assistant coaches were fantastic. We hired more as I was there. Tim Weaver came in, did a great job, coaching. I think he's at Brown now, but he had been the head coach at Bethany College in West Virginia and AD. Great coaches, good people, I think was number one. We recruited very well in the region we were in. And then when it was time to leave and go outside of the New York metropolitan area, I believe we brought in some fantastic players. And, as alluded to in the podcast I did with Greg, all those NFL players from New Jersey, from Wayne Corbett to you name it, across the board. Giovanni Carmazzi, he gets drafted higher than Tom Brady in that class.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, and higher than a bunch of people and he went to the 49ers. So I think that to answer your question there, it's like, I think guys were empowered by Coach Gardy. We were accountable to each other. When Greg had to go to Florida and recruit, and he brought in some great players from down there, I would hit the other side of Florida, or I'd go to Ohio, and we would just find ways. And heck, a guy called me once on a little superback, Nicky Johnson from Austin, Texas, and he came up, and next thing you know, he's a great little slot receiver, and he's fantastic football player. So it's like you get these guys, and then developing them was the key. And I thought we did a great job there in developing these players in the weight room as people, as guys that understood how to win football games. And, that first season, I think back, all those guys that came in, none were on scholarship. It was all Division III players, and we recruited that first class with a need-based scholarship. So it was just based on your financial aid package. So very similar to Division III, but just maybe a little better back in those days. So that's the group we brought in, and we go 8-2 that first season, and we're playing over half the teams are given scholarships.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Jog my memory, because I know you've told me this story about your quarterback. You had a unique kind of quarterback stories.
Oh, yeah.
From there at your time at Hofstra. Yeah,
my very first game at Hofstra, we're playing Bucknell, who was in the Patriot League, and we were a big underdog in that game, even though we'd beat I think we beat them the year before as D3, but now, it's like, oh, now they know who we are. It's payback time. And I can remember it's the first game I ever called plays. It's an opener, and I'm at the time, I'm sitting there trying to call the plays, and it was early in the game. My starting quarterback, Timmy Lynch, he throws the ball, and on his passing hand, this finger here, it would be the ring finger on your right hand. If you it goes out. I believe it was that or his middle finger. It gets caught in the face mask of a defensive lineman and snaps, and it gets fractured. And they say you're out 6 weeks, at least. So our starting quarterback is done. And we're like, thank God our defense was unbelievable. It kept getting turnover, but we kept turning it over. I don't know how many interceptions we were throwing in that game. And then I come back, and I think I put in George Beisel, who was our second team quarterback from Philadelphia. And George comes in, and he gets hurt. I'm like, what in the world are we doing here? And then I believe we were able to come back. And we had Michael Dodo from Cresskill, New Jersey, a tall quarterback who could throw the ball. He comes in there, and and he gets to play. And in one of those early in the season, I have 3 different quarterbacks go down. I know 2 went down in the Bucknell game, and then the rule we had back then is you don't lose your job to an injury. I don't know where I heard it. I just told them that in training camp. So it's like Michael Dodo comes in and he throws for, I think I saw it was a New York Times article. I had 485 yards against Central Connecticut, right? Gunned it, and we're winning. I mean, we came back and beat Bucknell in the opener, by a bunch of points, right? And then we go to Central Connecticut, and then we're playing what was called CW Post back then, LIU Post, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And George Beisel comes back. And George comes back in that game, and he throws for over 500 yards in that game.
Jeez.
And we torch him up there at their place, right? And George keeps playing, and we're winning. I mean, we're winning some games with our number 2 quarterback, and George is fantastic. And then it was time for Timmy Lynch. He gets the cast off, and I'm thinking, hey, we're winning a bunch of games. And I'm thinking, you know what? I told the guys, I told Coach Gardy, that's our rule. Where I got it from, I had no idea. But Timmy was always there at every practice, studied, knew what was going. He was really bright as a senior. So we're playing Fordham, and we're up at Fordham, and this was one of those games of lore. You're playing the Fordham Rams. Timmy Lynch comes out in that particular game with Wayne Corbett as a freshman at the time, and a bunch of really good players. On all sides of the ball. And he goes, I think he went 50 completions of 64 attempts.
Jeez.
For 585 yards. Wow. It was like, welcome, welcome back to football, Timmy Lynch. And that was awesome. Timmy's from West Islip, I recall, which is where Boomer Esiason's from.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So, it's a great football area up there in Long Island. So you get a guy like that, and we finished the season up 8-2, and it was awesome. I mean, the 2 losses we had that year, we lost to New Hampshire, which was a I mean, they had a bunch of NFL guys on their team, perennial playoff team there. And we came to Ohio, and we lost to Dayton.
Oh, wow.
Who was a really good team back then. In those days. I believe those were the two losses we had, and it was fun to do that. And that's my first year as the OC, where we ended up leading the nation in total offense. Passing offense, I think we averaged 405 yards a game. Scoring, it's all divisions. I mean, at that time we were the hot thing, and it was fun for me because this thing was going to start out. I was trying to be the receiver coach, remember, at Holy Cross, and because we were empowered by a fantastic football coach like Joe Gardy, at a place that he used to call it Disneyland. Hofstra. Yeah, I mean, really, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm talking beautiful campus, the tulips on the campus every spring. I mean, it was, you had the, reminds me back then, James Schuart was our president, who was a former captain of the Hofstra football team.
Wow.
Joe Margiata, who I only got to meet a couple times, he's the head of Teamsters, and he built the end zone complex, which was right there. So you've got, that was a football and lacrosse complex. John Danowski, who is now the head lacrosse coach at Duke, was our lacrosse coach, and I think it was his father was in the Hall of Fame at Fordham. He was like, the blocks of granite. He was one of them, So it's like there's so much history there and so much we could learn from being there. You just sort of felt that we could recruit well, and the players had such a good experience.
Yeah. You have this first year success as OC, or are you this young, brash coach, hey, I got this figured out, or what kind of ran through your mind after that first season at Hofstra, Coach?
This is a lesson learned for some guys out there. Be careful. Because I thought I knew it all.
Yeah.
I really did at that point. I was like, oh, shoot, look out. And what I realize now is we had really, really good coachable players that played well together as a team. We had a fantastic defense that bailed us out of so many situations to help us win football games. And I had some veterans on the offense, which always helps. So as you grow this, but I thought, it's the run and shoot. The run and shoot's great, and there's a lot to it, but there's so much more to it than that. So, I learned a lot. I went to the convention that year. It was in Nashville at the Opryland Hotel. And no, it wasn't. That was the one before. Oh, I know where it was. That convention was down in Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the Lowe's Anatole Hotel. And I'm walking around like, hey, everybody should know who I am. I'm the freaking, I'm this guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, what? That's why you don't know what you don't know. And then adversity hits, and guys had graduated. And now you're developing a guy. And the next year, I think 4 or 5 freshmen, at least 4, I know, starting on the offensive line. And everybody wants to pay you back for what you did the year before.
Yeah.
So it took us time, but those guys ended up being amazing later. But, just to do it with newcomers is back in those, it was very difficult. So I was humbled, but I had to learn. And oftentimes I believe when you are humbled, it's what you get out of it. It's not, the gaudy numbers that you put up when you had the team built up. It's more like, what can I take right now that can make me get better when you're in that underdog situation, which those are the jobs that usually open up, the tough ones, but only very few guys can actually know how to get in there and understand the process of turning something around.
Yeah. What would your message be to a young coach that kind of has some early success from your experiences?
My message would be, hey, look, study your tail off. And today it's so much easier because you do have these things on the internet to study. You can get to people, but, understand that it is a process working your way through your career, that you want to make sure that, that you're learning as you go and you apply that stuff and treat people great, because you just don't realize till after you leave a place how amazing those relationships were. You know, and that's a big part of this thing. I mean, I don't kid myself any day. I wake up and I feel blessed of the coaches that I get to work with here and all through my career. I mean, you're talking about great guys all the way back to that Kansas State staff. You know, I think about those guys often, and they're good people, and it helped me at every step along the way. But getting that first coordinator job is not easy when you don't know the head coach. You know. And I feel blessed for letting me join that family and being part of that legacy.
Yeah, I know when we first met, and you talk about this to the day, is offense success lies in the pits and the trenches and your offensive linemen.
Yeah.
And you had some great ones. I know at Hofstra, Dave Fiore, Domingo Graham. Owen Gardner, who was your center, and that's kind of a interesting story too.
Oh, yeah.
What did those guys kind of mean to your offense and bring to it?
Well, you had a bunch. I mean, I can remember all those guys. Steve Chimella. I mean, there's so many. One, I had a great O-line coach. Frank Lamanni, former Marine. And it's interesting, you know, he was in the Marines, but he was also a prison guard at Rikers Island.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he would.
Wow.
How about this for a guy? He would come in and work. His vacation was training camp, right? So he would take his vacation at Rikers Island, and literally we would work all summer together and say, all right, I'm going to be off these days, so I don't have to work, and this is my vacation. I'm not going into the prison. All right, but I'm coming here to work with these kids. The passion this guy had for coaching was unbelievable. He would take vacation days around football. He would come to Cincinnati to learn at in May every year. They got this big clinic for offensive line coaches, and Frank would come up there and learn, and then come back and show me, you know, this is what we want to be doing. It's what we'll be thinking about. You know, I've offered him a job once, twice, and he would never leave Long Island. You know, he's that great of a football coach in my estimation. And, you know, I think about that, and that's why our offensive line was so good. And we were able to do the things that we wanted to do because you had a guy like Frank Lamanni there, and all these other guys that came and followed, you know, they came into a group, and whoever the next O-line coach was, you know, he's got Domingo Graham sitting in there, you know, a freaking fantastic football player from Newark that we had recruited. And, you know, he was already being trained by a guy. Yeah, he's a prison guard at Rikers Island, but this dude's a great O-line coach. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Is you need great offensive line coaches to help get that done. You need players willing to pay the price, because those guys, they don't get any glory at all. Mm-hmm. It's a team deal for them. So, when that quarterback, when Timmy Lynch threw for 585 yards, those guys up front, the best time they had was in the locker room. We won the game. That's what it was about. They weren't in the newspaper, nothing. But what an opportunity to coach those guys and be around them and just see them mature. Mm-hmm. Dave Fiore was amazing.
Yeah.
Here's the dude that, I think at one time he was the strongest man in the National Football League. But, he came out of Hofstra and was just a guy that was in this offense and was there for basically 5 years. I think he broke his leg one season and came back and stronger than ever and ended up starting for the 49ers and, Steve Young at quarterback. So it's crazy.
Was Frank tough? Describe him as your offensive line coach a little bit for us.
I would say his players thought he was tough. To me, he was loyal and was a lifelong learner. Mm-hmm. Kind of guy that I know when I have podcasts, he'll call me. Hey, I listened to this. That was great, So I think that's fantastic. I think he is always in fantastic shape. Shoot, I think the time we went up to New Hampshire that first year we played them, he would wake up early, and I remember looking out my window of the hotel, and we stayed at a hotel that was like on the ocean, It was an inland where University of New Hampshire. We stayed there, and I look out, and it's October, and he's swimming in the ocean at like 5 a.m. or something. That's Frank,
Yeah.
and love him, and he's helped so many coaches out there get better, So I just I can't say enough about that guy.
Yeah. Is he still coaching?
He is. He was as of about a year or two ago.
Okay.
I don't know what he's going to do right now. I know he's still in Long Island, so he called me not too long ago, actually. And was excited that we had launched the podcast and so forth. So if you're out there, Frank, and I know you always check up on me, and I appreciate that. But I do know he's in amazing shape, and he's in mid-60s. I think maybe 64 right now. And you don't want to get locked up in an elevator with this guy,
Yeah.
But he's the nicest guy, really.
Yeah. These relationships, and we've kind of talked about them this whole show. Describe the relationships that you've gleaned over the years. It's pretty cool, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you and Greg talked about that quite a bit as well.
Yeah, it is, and you only get a very short time to work with anybody. It's especially in my bizarre career of moving every 3 years or so. I think when you're there, you have to enjoy the process and realize that everybody you're with is there for a reason, and you're going to learn from them, and they're going to learn from you. But get out of your head, get your ego out of the way, and be okay with playing the role you've got to play. If you're the coordinator, that's what you do. If you're the receiver coach, that's what you do. Linebacker, it doesn't matter. Just do your job, as Bill Belichick would say. Do your job and take care of each other, because coaching football is so different than most other sports, because you have a larger staff, you have a bigger team, you have guys that have to bond together or the wheels will come off the cart. And I believe that those relationships I've been so fortunate to have over the years have only helped me become better as I approach the last 20 years of my coaching career.
Yeah. And a lot of NFL guys that you got to Hofstra, which I don't think a lot of people understand. I mean, you had some dudes there, Coach.
Yeah, and I just had a couple myself, but I will say, Gigantino and those guys did a great, and the guys afterwards, you get guys like Kyle Flood that came in as a coach there, who, he had been the head coach. I think Kyle was the head coach at Rutgers, and he's at Alabama now, coaching the offensive line. I think it was the Falcons. I mean, you get some guys in there. You just look at those great coaches that followed through, and the great players that went to the National Football League. I know, I would be doing a disservice to talk about all of them, from Lance Schulters, that Domingo Graham. The list goes on, and that's just part of it. I mean, it's just part of it. It's those other guys that helped them get better every day. As a Flying Dutchman back in those days, or later they changed the name to the Pride. Yeah. But either way, I think it's a great place that just doesn't play football anymore. You know, and we've got coaches all over the place, former players. Jimmy Salgado, who's another guy, very good up and coming football coach with the Buffalo Bills, assistant up there. You got a bunch of them. You got the head coach of the Falcons. I mean, you just go. I mean, Quinn, was there at Hofstra after I had left. But it's sort of interesting when you go out and there's a camaraderie with guys, even there where you haven't. I never coached with a guy like Rob Spence, but if I'm out there, if I'm with him, there is a connection, a bond, and we can be like it was yesterday. Yeah. So I think there's something special there.
Yeah. And Coach Gigantino's daughter is with the Atlanta Falcons, high up in their system.
Yeah, Sarah Hogan. She's amazing, and I have a podcast coming up with her soon.
Cool.
Which will be fantastic. So, she's at the top of this deal in the National Football League with working for Coach Quinn.
Yeah. Finishing up, how much did your time at Hofstra kind of set your path to where you are, Coach, and some of the people you coached with there? I know it's deep in your heart.
Yeah, I would say it was more. It set me up even to today. Those 3 years I had there, all of them were different, and every part of it I was fortunate to learn about how to create something special where I've been. And it wasn't just about the run and shoot. It was about being with good people. It was about seeing guys that cared about each other. and overcoming adversity, because it was always about that. And you're going to have one thing I'll leave you with here is, Joe used to always tell these stories about, Miguel Cervantes, who wrote the book Don Quixote, right? And Joe would come in the staff meeting and say, look, I feel like Don Quixote. If you guys ever are a head coach, I want you to understand this. And I'm listening patiently the first time. Now, we heard this tens of times over the 3 years I was there. And he goes, I'm always fighting windmills. I go, what are you talking about? I'm thinking about the book, and he goes, it's like this. Quixote would go out, I think it was in Spain, and he would be charging on his horse, right, with charging at windmills, and then they would disappear, right? That was my understanding. And it was like he saw being a head coach as you're always having people create distraction for you, which are these windmills, and you're always fighting the windmills because it might be legitimate. Sometimes you may get the windmill, but other times it was just something that you create in your mind or somebody else created to get you off task. So I learned from Joe, it's important to stay focused on the big picture and all these other windmills that are out there, these things that happen that may take you off the task, to make sure you put it in proper perspective and treat people in a fantastic way. Because in the end, it's, you win with people. And that's where this whole thing came from.
Good stuff, Coach. I could go on all day, but I'll let you go.
Oh, yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lynn, for
Thank
coming
you so
in
much. Yep.
on this
Enjoyed
Inside
it.
Access.
Thank you.
Yes.